Welcome to the Mad and Crip Theology podcast, hosted by Miriam Peace and Amy Patton, which come out of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health, and Disability.
We both live and work on lands that have been homes and remain homes to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Neutral, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples and other peoples who have cared for the land.
We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and are mindful of the need to repair broken covenants.
This podcast is an opportunity to model how faith communities can engage in theological and spiritual conversations around madness and cripness.
If you need a full transcript, you can find our videos on our YouTube channel.
We want to say before we begin that topics and conversations we are raising throughout our time together are often hard.
They are hard for Mad and Crip people ourselves, and hard for our families and loved ones.
So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, your bodies, minds, and hearts.
And now, here is our episode.
Well, welcome to the Mad and Crip Theology podcast. It's so nice to be with you today. And we are recording in the morning again. This is like some kind of social experiment that we're trying to see if we have a little bit more brain power in the mornings. And it seems to be working pretty good so far. So today, Miriam and I are joined by three lovely women, Laura and Wendy, and Shauna is here with us today. So, Shauna, I wonder if you could take a second to introduce yourself to our listeners, because you are a new voice on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so nice to be here with you all. I'm excited. Yeah, I'm Shauna. I am a second year PhD student at Emmanuel College in the Toronto School of Theology. And I grew up on the west coast of Canada, mostly near Vancouver. And have been interested since I was very, very little in many big questions, to the chagrin of my mother, I think many, many days. But I've had theological questions since I was born, she says. So I'm really excited to kind of continue that conversation here. I am really interested in the conversation of trauma theologies and the language of redemption, salvation, and hope. How do we talk eschatologically about these things without being harmful? So that's kind of the focus of my research. And yeah, I've spent most of my adult life working in the downtown east side of Vancouver with women and children mostly. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Well, welcome, Shauna. We're so happy that you'll be joining us for some of the roundtables that are coming up. And I might say just quickly, we're having some work done on our house right now. So there will probably be banging and crunching and things that are happening in the background. So I'm so sorry in advance. And they're like literally right below me. So yeah, there's going to be sawing and all kinds of stuff. And just before we get started, we just wanted to remind our listeners that we have some calls for content that we've put out on our Facebook page that we would love for you to check out. Our journal issue for the spring is going to be on caregiving, both for people who give and receive care. So we hope you'll check that out. We hope to have some creative content, some stories, art, photography. If you're doing academic work and want to put in a paper, that would be very awesome. So please check that out. And there's another call for content as well for the press that's on caregiving. We're looking for stories of caregivers. So we can put the link to the Facebook page below the podcast as well.
And a reminder that our next podcast will focus on a Q&A. So if you have any questions, anything you would like to hear us discuss, we might not have the answers, but we'll have words to share. And so you can find that info on the Facebook page too.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Miriam. And I just want to say that we have a lot of people with curly hair on the podcast today, which is lovely. Growing up, whenever I would go to the hairdresser would always straighten my hair. So I get very excited when I see other people with curly and wavy hair. So
I'm the only one.
All right. So for today, the question that we're going to be talking about kind of like is branching off of our last episode's question. So last time we talked about what mental health and disability theology makes us upset and why. And today we're going to be talking about what theology and theologies do you now know that you wish your younger self would have known and why. So on our last episode, we dipped our toes into some feminist theology. So we'd like to pick up where we left off. So is there somebody who'd like to get us started with your theology you wish you would have known when you were younger? Crickets? I feel like I'm teaching right now and all the students are like, I don't want to talk. Wendy, would you like to get us started? I know you had talked in our last episode about power and how power exists in the church and society. Were you thinking of picking up on that thread, or do you have something different for today?
No, I could certainly pick up on that. I guess the theology, there's kind of two areas of theology that I wish I had known when I was younger. Well, I guess part of me thinks I wish I had known when I was younger, and the other part of me thinks maybe I wouldn't have known what to do with them. So it's kind of a, how in some ways I wonder if we come to the theology that we need when we need it. So I'll just leave that there. One of them is, of course, feminist theology, but I'm going to leave that to Laura. Because I suspect that is, that may be her answer. She might bring something else to the table, but just in case. But the other theology is the theology of multiplicity, and the idea that that Christian theology, many theologies, but certainly Christian theology, really focuses on an idea of oneness. That we really focus on not just that God is necessarily one, but that so much of our lens of interpreting theology is one. That we have one idea of God, one image of God, that so many of the stories even of Jesus telling parables relating to disciples is that there's like one beloved disciple, one interpretation of stories, one that we really view our theology with an idea of oneness. And so when I came, that idea always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And it was only when I came into my PhD work, actually, that I, in a course in my first year PhD, I TA'd a course on feminist intersectional theology, and was introduced to the idea of a Christian theology of multiplicity, and theologians, feminist theologians like Laurel Schneider, who picked up the idea, or who really discusses the idea of multiplicity, and how not even understanding God as many, but as multiple. That really sort of allowed me a lens to understand why that idea of oneness was so troublesome, and gave me a lens in which to really start to dig at that idea of oneness, and how we can really deconstruct it, and also a way to relate to other worldviews, other theologies, other religious traditions. And yeah, so I'll leave it there, but that's my initial answer.
Thanks so much, Wendy. And how do you think that knowing about this multiplicity helps you think about your disabilities? Does it?
Absolutely. I think that it allows me to consider Christian theologies and Christian doctrines in a way that makes them accessible, rather than just anachronistic and kind of to be thrown away. So rather than like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, it allows for a lens to kind of reconsider, to look at doctrines like image of God and say, how do we look at that through a lens of multiplicity? How do we look at, Laurel Schneider does a fabulous deconstruction and reconstruction of the theology of incarnation in that way. And really so many of our doctrines are really doctrines of multiplicity. The Trinity is in and of itself multiple, right? It's not one. God is not one. And so how do we start to consider different ways of viewing God, as understanding God in more than one way? And so when I consider who I am in relation to God, rather than viewing myself as an alternative, as someone who functions with disabilities kind of like at the margins, always trying to, not always, because I also am a white person. And so there's some ways that, of course, I'm part of the dominant culture, and some ways that I am not part of the dominant culture. And so how does the understanding of multiplicity and viewing God as multiple allow for the idea of that sort of multiple voices, rather than the idea of God as one image, and trying to relate to that one image through multiple voices? Like, so if that is a roundabout way of answering your question.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's so interesting. And Wendy's dissertation work is on this exact topic. So we're interested to continue to journey together and see how things end up as you're writing and thinking about these things. Miriam, could I invite you to go next to share?
Thank you, Amy. So I'm coming at it, well, with a bit of a backstory. So when I was really little, I went to a nursery at the CDRP at the Shadow Cause fiddle, and there I was with other kids with disabilities. But from 5 on, I was fully integrated into the public and university and so on. And I've always I've always advocated for the integrated system for many reasons, but lately, when I started doing my PhD work and hadn't been with a crip community or a Mad and Crip community and hadn't been really interested in disability studies before. I wonder about had I missed out on the opportunity throughout my childhood to be engaged with that community. Am I making sense? Nodding heaven. So it wasn't, I didn't, so in my FDP when I didn't really dip my toes into disability theology because I was um I was stubborn or something and said disability is only one part of me. I'm interested in so many other things, like Palestinians were like feminist theologians, like post-colonial studies, and so on. So I don't know how my life would have been different if I had that community. I was even kind of suspicious of that community, which sounds awful to say now, but I think it was some internalized ableism at play. So I wish I had some idea of that community and that work, and I wish I wasn't so stubborn in my earlier days to, to see the wisdom that came out of that. Nancy Asman's book came out when I was 8, so I wouldn't have been reading that, but I didn't interact with her book until I was like in my 20s, mid-20s. So I agree that theology comes when we need it. I agree with you, Wendy, but I just wonder if I had that community and that different knowledge of the who would I have been. That's a non-answer. I will invite Laura to go next.
Sorry, I needed to find my unmute button. Thanks, Miriam. It's interesting because I'm just listening to your answer and reflecting a little bit on some of the decisions we made on behalf of our son, Matthew. He was, of course, growing up after you when there was enormous pressure to place children in fully included settings. And I theoretically loved fully included settings, except what we found was that my son was often very isolated and excluded in those settings. And to the point that we actually moved him to a congregated setting. And the enormous guilt I felt around that for many years. Yeah, so I appreciate your reflection on there are wonderful advantages, but also maybe some challenges to both approaches. And we need to think of lots of different things when we make these decisions, and especially as parents, when we're making these decisions on behalf of our children who can't yet tell us what they want or need, or in some cases, like my son, may not ever be able to tell us in sophisticated ways what they want and need. So yeah, thank you for that. That was helpful to hear, actually. So I find myself thinking of this question, and because it's such a personal question, you're going to get a personal answer here. So surprise for me, the answer is feminist theology. I sort of tipped my hat last week. And I feel I need to, like Miriam, add a bit of context to my answer. So I wonder if I'm the oldest in the group. We're not going to check on that, but I might be. And that means that I was growing up and being influenced quietly by the theological influences of, say, the 1970s. And while women were ordained in the United Church, I just double checked that date as we were recording. In my world, it was not yet common. And there was still a strong patriarchal sort of emphasis of the faith community I lived in. And while I attended and was a member of the United Church as a young person, my familial influences came from outside the United Church, from traditions that would be less progressive, more conservative. And I sort of put all those words in scare quotes, but there would have been a very different theology. It was certainly more dominated, sort of oriented more towards men and patriarchal influences and a patriarchal interpretation of the Bible. It was also heavily infused by what I would say is the prosperity gospel. And so, yeah, those would have been the voices in my head and the voices informing my theology as a young person and well into my 20s, possibly into my 30s, which is about the time Miriam probably was 8. Just to put it in context, because that's about the time I probably would have met her at Five Oaks Family Camp, and she kicked our butts at cards. But I think, so getting back to feminist theology and why it resonated for me. So I really didn't read feminist theology in any meaningful way until my doctoral work, like other people. And so I'm discovering feminist theology as a woman in her mid-40s who has children, who grew up in a fairly patriarchal world, who was at the time a stay-at-home mom because of caregiving responsibilities. And I'm caring for a profoundly disabled child with significant needs. And I'm being informed I'm hearing the prosperity gospel, that if I only sort of espouse a certain faith, then somehow my situation might change and things might get better, because things weren't great. I was completely isolated and overwhelmed at this stage of my life. Affluent, had lots of resources. I sort of want to own my privilege here, but also isolated and overwhelmed. So it was a complicated place to be. And I go back to school to pursue a PhD, because why not when you're overwhelmed? And I read this feminist theology. The first book was, I mentioned last week, Nakashima Brockham Parker's Proverbs of Ashes, which I read for a first-year class. And for me, that was life-changing. It was women, first of all, who embed their theology in stories. So it was immediately accessible to me. I could relate to the stories. I could see myself in some of the stories. Some of the stories, no. There are stories of domestic abuse that are overwhelming as well. but this critiquing of suffering and of suffering as a source of redemption, this valorization of suffering, was very impactful during a time in my life where I'm caring for a child who is visibly suffering, and by extension, I'm suffering. And I don't know what to do with this. And I'm being informed by the prosperity gospel that tells me if I somehow don't sort of push up against the suffering, that I could be, in fact, exacerbating it or bringing it on myself. So this feminist theology that started to actively critique that narrative, that theology that I had grown up with, and that had just become the implicit voice in my head, was huge. I've since gone on to read other feminist theologians and intersectional feminist theologians. So I, probably started with first wave theologians, though Nakshima Brock were my entry points, but would have read some first wave sort of feminist work, and then gradually grew beyond that into intersectional feminist work. And it simply just has been enormously helpful. I appreciate the storied nature. I appreciate the multiplicity, as was highlighted earlier. I appreciate the critiquing of sort of some of the sacred ideas we hold in some of the more traditional churches, and really call us to account for them and look at different ways to engage them. And for me, I just appreciate how it allowed me to re-narrate my own story and to consider my own theology during a very difficult time in my life in such a way that it became helpful rather than harmful. So yeah, personal answer, feminist theology, still love it. So can I invite Shauna? Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Sure. I resonate with so much of what you say. And Wendy, I also love that intersectional feminist theologies class. It got my mind turning. And I thought, one of my thoughts in that class was, why didn't I know these names before? And I remember thinking back years ago when I would ask the question, like, okay, where are the feminine voices here? Where are the women in the syllabi and all of this? And someone asked me, what women are you reading? And I thought, like, I don't know. And so I've kind of one of the entry points into feminist theology for me was Sally McFaig's work. And it was kind of like when I was in my undergrad, just finishing up my BA, and I had done economics and environmental studies, and was thinking about the state of the world and all of the suffering that I had talked about for the last 5 years of my BA, and all these things that I was learning. And I thought, if I can't find a view of God, an articulation of God that makes sense in a world that is suffering, in the world that I saw happening around me, then I was like, well, then I can't, then that faith isn't for me. And so I had this huge question of, like, the theologies that I heard growing up didn't make sense with the world that I saw, that I was living in, that I was experiencing. And so I ended up interning at a Christian environmental organization, and the educational director, I walked up to him one day, and I thought I was being kind of like sassy and hilarious. And I was like, do you have any like feminist, like eco theology that's kind of anarchist? And also, and I throw all of these words out at him, and he was like, yes. And he handed me this like stack of books that I still appreciate. And one of them was a book by Sally McFaig. I think Blessed Are the Consumers was just coming out at that point. And I read it like voraciously. I just like every single little piece. And I looked her up, and she was working at the Vancouver School of Theology as this distinguished theologian in residence. And so I started to think about, okay, well, if you can articulate God in a way that makes sense here, then maybe there's other articulations of God that make sense in a multitude of other places too. And so that kind of started my journey, Sally McFaig's words. I mean, her metaphors, God, and there's so much of her that kind of has been steeped into my early explorations into these questions. And I think, to answer the question explicitly, today, looking back, I would say that I do wish I had a different theology of the body when I was growing up. I wish that it had come into my life sooner. And this has like connections with so many themes that you all have talked about already. Suffering, especially for, I grew up in a kind of semi-complementarian or quietly complementarian culture, church culture. And I just didn't quite understand that materiality. This is also where Sally McFaig like comes in again, was like, materiality is important, and it's not only important, but it's valuable in and of itself, exactly as it is. So that has all kinds of implications for, are we meant to suffer? If we're looking forward eschatologically one day, like these ideas of cleanliness and hope in the future, this clean white linens one day if we only do XYZ in the present, and it just erases and disappears some of the suffering in the present. And so actually, when you said Rita Nakashima Brock, her book with Rebecca Parker, Saving Paradise, kind of touches on some of these themes, and that has been a really influential space for me as well, looking at their words. But yeah, I guess a theology of the body. I wish I had had a theology that told me that my body, the way that it was, exactly as it was not dangerous in any way, was not a cause for my own grief, but was and is good as it is. And I didn't need to work at anything. It just was as it was. So I'll leave it there. I could go on and on about body theology forever, but I won't.
Thanks so much, Shauna. That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that you've read so many things that a lot of us have read. And I think I'm behind a little bit in some of the feminist theology, so I need to catch up. I've been writing down some of the titles as y'all have been talking. So I guess I'm last. I wanted to just bring up some stuff I've been like ruminating on, and like, you know, like the dissertation process is like you start and then you have to have an end. So I have been ruminating on some God image stuff in my final chapter, and so I thought I would talk about that a little bit today. And so in the class I teach in the summer that Shauna has helped me with this past summer. Thank you so much, Shauna, for all your input and all your help with that. We look at God images, and there's one image of God that I've pulled from actually an atheist clothing website, which is like, I didn't know that was a thing, but there is a clothing website. So there's this one image of Jesus wearing a straitjacket. And so Jesus is just like standing there, his like arms are crossed in the straitjacket, and he has a crown of thorns and on, and he's just like looking at you, the viewer. And I thought it was so compelling when I first saw the image. And I wanted to bring that to the class for us to talk about this image of Jesus, who I can't remember the scripture reference. I'd have to look it up. There's a part in Mark where a verse in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus's family says that he's gone out of his mind. So there's this idea that, has Jesus gone crazy? And his family thinks he has. And so we sit with the image for a bit in class, and it's interesting to see some of the push and pull. Some students really like the image. They're like, this is good. I think I feel at home with this image. It really resonates with me, and some other students really don't like it. They're like, there's no flippin' way that this is like sacrilege or something, you know. But I just thought maybe I would talk a little bit about Anna Maria Rizzuto's work on God image, from the Birth of the Living God. And I just have like a section of her book. It's available on Internet Archive if you want to take a look at it. That just talks a little bit about where, like, what the God image is and like how we develop it when we're young. And then maybe I'll just try to tie it up with the image of the crazy Jesus after I finish reading this. So this is from The Birth of the Living God by Anna Maria Rizzuto. This is page 8. Okay, she says, "It is also true that God is not the creation of the child alone. God is found in the family. Most of the time, he is offered by the parents to the child. He is found in everyday conversation, art, architecture, and social events. He is presented as invisible but nonetheless real. Finally, most children are officially introduced to that quote-unquote house of God, a place where God supposedly quote-unquote dwells one way or the other. That house is governed by rules very different from any others. The child is introduced to ritual, to the official behavior he is expected to exhibit there, and to other events in which the encounter with God is socially organized and prearranged. But the child brings his own God, the one he has himself put together, to this official encounter. Now the God of religion and the God of the child hero face one another. Reshaping, rethinking, and endless rumination, fantasies, and defensive maneuvers will come to help the child in his difficult task. This second birth of God may decide the conscious religious future of the child. This is the critical moment for those interested in catechesis. If they want to understand the progress of an individual child, they must have some knowledge of the private God the child brings with him. No child arrives at the house of God without his pet God under his arm. The natural history of God does not end there. Unless completely repressed and isolated defensively from its complex roots, the representation of God, like any other, is reshaped, refined, and retouched throughout life. With aging, the question of the existence of God becomes a personal matter to be faced or avoided. For most people, the occasion for deciding on the final representation of their God comes in contemplating their own impending death. So I just want to recommend Anna Maria Rizzuto's book as like the most fascinating book to read. So in her study, she basically takes, I think it's like 25 patients who she calls psychiatric patients, and like takes down this like amazing like history of like from birth to where they are now, and like analyzes and puts together sketches of who their God is. And I think one thing that really kind of like honestly like blew my mind when I was reading this book is that she says that we become the image of God that we want to see. And I've been thinking a lot about that. You know, who is the God that I want to see? You know, why is the image of Jesus in the straitjacket so compelling to me? And what does it mean what would it mean if a church community or like us as a part of the Mad and Crip community could embrace that image? And where would that Jesus go, and what would that Jesus do and not do and say and not say? These are like the questions that I've been sort of like tumbling around in my mind as I've been finishing my thesis, hopefully knock on wood, finishing. And also just like as I think about where I want to go with my sort of work moving forward. Yeah, so that's that. And yeah, I'm glad you could all be a part of my exploding brain as I read Anna Maria Rizzuto. So I wonder if anybody has any questions for anyone about what we've said this morning.
Can I just jump in and respond and actually thank you for that last little bit about thinking through the Imago Dei? And I talk about that and I think about it. And in the classes I teach, I use all sorts of provocative images, but I've never thought about what did I need? I've always thought about it in very broad academic terms. And I'm almost afraid that lightning is going to strike me as I answer this question, because it's going to feel so incredibly sacrilegious. And it's like I'm almost afraid to say it out loud.
Okay, we like these kind of questions and
I
stuff,
know,
Laura.
but
May we all be struck.
yeah, it's like, okay, please don't strike me down, God. But actually, so what probably you need to know, again, context is everything, is my son died 2 weeks into the pandemic, and we only had his internment a week ago because of how the pandemic influenced funerals. And the person who presided over his funeral, of course, started with the typical internment stuff that involves prayers and Bible passages, and I rip them all out and I replace them with passages about Tinkerbell and fairies and Goodnight Moon, because that was appropriate. My son loved fairies, and so I thought, what do I need the image of God to be? And as I'm listening to you, I thought, the image of God is Tinkerbell to me, like a fairy, a woman, first of all, who loves the garden and can fly through the air. And yes, I know I'm going back to sort of this happy image, but because for me, the image that worked thinking about my son was that my son is with God now, which means he's flying with the fairies. And that was sort of the image that I was able to make work for his internment. And I never thought, wow, the image of God, at least in this particular moment, I like other images of God a lot, but might be Tinkerbell. And anyway, thank you for that. That was a lot of fun. And lightning hasn't struck, so I'm going to sign off now. Well, I'm ahead.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's good to play with these images and disrupt what we usually see. Anyone else have any wonderings about something that somebody said? Miriam, I wanted to ask you, why are you suspicious of the Mad and Crip community? Were you worried that you were going to become boring or something? Like what was the suspicion?
I'm not sure it was suspicious because they seem like I was suspicious of segregation, I guess, growing up in a very anti-segregation society in the 90s. And I was suspicious that they didn't have, I assumed, not just assumed about them, I assumed the community was smaller, even though I was often isolated in my non-segregated class. So and I worried about becoming a single issue person a lot. So like I'm gay and I want to be gay and care about sexuality. So I can't put my finger on why I was suspicious, but I was. for not very good reasons, and I think I missed out on relationship that could have been really formational.
Well, thanks so much for that. Yeah, that helps us to understand a little bit more. And I know you and I've talked many times as we've been like creating the journal and getting the podcast rolling and stuff, how we've been suspicious as well of sort of disability theology spaces that sort of recycle certain narratives.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm feeling a little bit of conviction, as they say. My evangelical past is coming back to haunt me right now, but like maybe we've missed out a little bit too by assuming what what might be there in those spaces.
Yeah. When do you look like you have something?
Yeah, I think I can only speak for myself, of course, as we all can. But when I was first diagnosed with epilepsy, I was 28 and I was, I'll say, wholly outed because I had my first grand mal seizure in the choir loft at church on Thanksgiving Sunday. So there was no like hiding, if you will. But after that, I just started telling everyone, oh no, it was just a one-off, I'm fine. And I moved from the congregation that I was serving into another job and told nobody that I was epileptic. And nobody at my new job knew ever. And actually, I had been having seizures since I was 10 years old and didn't realize it because my family just called them episodes, and no one really realized what was going on with me. And the more seizures I had, the less I was able to hide them, of course. But also the more I kind of decided that I wouldn't try to hide them anymore, that I would like work with my workplace to kind of establish some living into accessibility policy, the more I realized that some of my friends and colleagues just honestly stopped talking to me. And that was a very challenging time, to be honest. I had a couple of friends who just out and out friend-dumped me, like who met and said, I just am not comfortable. I don't have the empathy that I feel I should have. And so I don't feel I'm my best self around you, and just stopped being friends with me. And so I think that part of the challenge for me anyways, was that I knew that like wholly owning my diagnosis and moving into communities like the one that we have here meant a shift in my identity. It meant a shift in my communities. And that is a significant identity shift. So I'm not sure for me, it was so much suspicion of new communities as it was grief over losing old communities. And that's not to say that wasn't necessary, but it's not any less painful.
For sure, it's very painful. And thank you for naming that. And talk about coming out crip, like when I was 29 or 30 or older than that, even though my safety has been from birth, that claiming of identity, yeah, it changed me and how I relate to people and how I relate to myself. Yes. Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome, and thank you. And I think too, I'll just say this last little bit and then we can move on to other voices, that in the Shauna, what you were saying about body theology, and I think that part of it for me relates to body theology and being raised in a church and as a white woman in Canada, with the idea that white women's bodies are supposed to be nice and non-conflictual and kind and quiet. And so the fact that I have a disability that sometimes I cannot control, which is very obtrusive. It was like trying to keep that nice and non-obtrusive and quiet was absolutely impossible. And the guilt that I felt about that was overwhelming at times. And trying to keep it quiet was very challenging and was in constant conflict with this sense of how I was raised in church, right? And yeah, anyway, I'll pass it off.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think like purity culture for me covers more than just like our sexuality and our sexual acts as we're, growing up. It kind of covers everything for everyone. It is this idea that our bodies in every way must be a particular way, they must be quiet and unobtrusive and don't make anyone stumble, And so as you're talking, I just heard those words again in my mind, of like, don't make a brother stumble is how I heard it, right? But more generally, like, don't make anyone stumble. Don't be too loud. Don't do anything to take up too much space. So thank you for sharing that. It resonated.
Yeah, we should do an entire podcast episode on purity culture. That would be so interesting. I would love to hear what everybody has to say about that, and yeah, how it still affects us as we're older. So Laura had to jet off because she has a bunch of meetings today, so that's why Laura's voice is no longer on the episode. Does anybody have anything else that they want to ask or anything else we want to chat about before we end today? Well, thank you so much to all of you for being here. Miriam and I really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to next week when we're going to have the next episode where we're going to have another roundtable with all of us here answering some of the questions that our listeners have for us. And we, like Miriam said, we probably won't know the answer, but it'll be good for us to dig in and discuss. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.